Welcome to the Bond Business School Business Now video series. My name is Lisa Gouthorpe and I'm the Associate Dean of External Engagement. Today we'll be reinforcing that business fundamentals have not changed despite the challenging time we find ourselves in. Our panel today will focus on family enterprise. Joining our panel is Nick Bloor, co-founder and CEO of IVM Group, Shane OReilly, Managing Director of OReilly's Rainforest Retreat, and Bruce Hatcher, Family Business Consultant from BDO. Joining them is Bond Business School academic Professor Justin Craig. Now I'd like to welcome our panel. Welcome Nick, welcome Shane and welcome Bruce. Thank you for being here. I'll start with you, Shane. So as Managing Director of OReilly's Rainforest Retreat, it's a third generation family enterprise. How have you been coping over these last few months?
Well, Lisa, we closed down in March. We had to close. So that was the first time OReilly's been closed since opening for Easter in Easter 1926. So that was a bit of a mental challenge for, I think, all the OReilly family and probably a fair few of the staff and customers. And we opened in mid-June. We've been really, really busy since then. So it's been okay for us so far.
But one of the things we stress or we observe during these times of crisis, and this is for all three of you to consider, is that business fundamentals don't change. And I know, Nick, you've got some theories on that, and Bruce, you've been through a few crises over the time. So if you can actually consider that, you know, getting back to the basics of business, and Shane, you to pick it up over time, because you do go through different challenges. These challenges are different, but in many ways there's some similarities, you know, when you do come up against these. So Nick, you know, so some of the things that don't change about business, your business over time, particularly in these challenging times.
Yeah, Justin, I mean, look, it's a great question. I think, you know, my team and I were talking about it just recently, and, you know, we kind of likened it to business, if you think about it, like mountain climbing, right? And you're heading to Everest. You're going to have some really beautiful days, blue skies, easy going, but you know that at some stage the blizzard's going to come, and you need to be prepared for that. As business people, we need to be prepared for it, and I think, you know, what's happening at the moment with COVID is a lot like the blizzards hit. It doesn't change the climate, doesn't change the fundamentals, just means we need to have a few more oxygen canisters on board to survive the climb. And so, you know, I think about business fundamentals, I think people, strategy, execution, cash. You know, and cash is like, you know, the oxygen canisters. We perhaps need a few more of them at the moment, but the fundamentals don't change.
Okay, Shane. So when you talk about fundamentals,
the fundamentals that a business person need to look at is what they can control. And at times like this, the uncertainty is such a high level. You've got to really focus on going back to those things of what can I control, and look at that. And that's really all you can do, because so much is out of our hands and you just don't know what's going to be announced the next day or the day after, or what's going to happen, and you can't control that. So you just have to focus on what you can control and really try and deliver on those things and make sure you're still afloat on the other end.
So there's things that you sort of put them in a bucket. Okay, here, there's these things that are extraneous that, you know, I can't actually do anything about those, but let's list down these fundamental things that I can have some control over and focus on those and not get distracted by all this other noise.
That's right, don't get distracted. Exactly.
Bruce, you know, you've seen a few of these, so, you know, from your perspective as being in the professional services, as being a consultant to family enterprises, what are the family enterprises that do sustain across time, do well?
Well, I think those who understand their business well is the first thing. I think there's had to be a reset of your time horizons. Instead of looking out 10 years, you're looking out 6 to 12 months, and the long term's probably about 2 years. But you've got to really understand your business, and, you know, my view is the old axioms of 20% of your customers produce 80% of your business, so you've got to focus on the things that will make a difference. Definitely understand your cost structures. You know, don't just sack people because times are tight. You know, you may have to stagger using a roster system, so drop people back to 2 or 3 or 4 days a week. Obviously use all the government incentives that are around, but most importantly realise that you just can't take all the experience out of your business, cut your costs and expect that you've got somewhere to go when you come through this, because we will come through it. And I think, you know, that the strategic issues really become, are we going to be working from home as a natural course of business in the future? And therefore are our premises far too big for our needs? So what are we going to be able to do to be in a position to take advantages of different conditions that will probably emerge 12 months out? So I think knowing your business, concentrating on your best customers, more contact with those customers, whether it be telephone, whether it be you know, a Teams meeting, whether you can go and visit them and just see what their needs are, and maintain those relationships that, you know, you see a business founded in 1926, it must have done a lot of things right to take it through a number of generations. And family businesses, really, they have patient capital, and they usually take a very big focus on the relationships they've built and that have made their businesses strong.
Interesting you talk about strategy, and you know, you guys who are living this from an operational point of view, you know, your shorter term horizons, you know, family businesses are known for their long-term orientation, but now in this particular, you're looking at, you know, 3 years as a long time out. Would you guys comment on that? Is your horizon, is your strategy changed? Is the way you're doing strategic planning had to alter?
Well, certainly for me it has. I think our long-term horizon is about 3 months, so we're probably in the wrong end of the scale. But it is pretty tough trying to do long-term planning when you don't know what market you even have for your business as a tourism business, particularly at the moment, because we've had our conference market dissipate, we've had our international market disappear, we've had our wedding markets constrained. We're really left with one local leisure market. So they are only really make up 50% of our business normally. They're now providing us 100%. So do we need to work on that market and make it work for us, but the other markets are still there. We don't want to lose sight of them. But when we'll have them back, we don't know. And will there be new markets? Well, we don't know that either. There may well be.
So the whole process of strategy is thrown out the window and say, okay, here. It goes back, I suppose, Shane, what can we control? We can't control these 4 markets, but we have some say in our local market, so there's our focus of attention.
That's right.
Nick, strategy. You know, you're a big strategy guy.
Yeah, look, one of my favourite sayings, Justin, is that if you can't fit your strategy on the back of a beer coaster, you probably don't have one. So I think what sort of this period, I think for me, shines a light on is kind of the tension between the long-term view that we, you know, in private business we can have, you know, that preserve the core, if you like, our core DNA, you know, our values, our reason for being, but then realise that we need to be pulsing faster, you know. And so in a time like this, I know with our team, you know, we meet 9:05 every day, and that's what's happened in the last 24 hours, what's going to happen in the next 24 hours, where are we stuck, right? And we do that religiously. And so I think that mix of simplicity and consistency and discipline is, you know, you're going back to your earlier point, they're fundamentals of business. This just shines a light on that and makes that more critical.
The other thing that distinguishes family business is the family. You know, and we can't get away at this. So your communication with family members, you know, their appreciation of the fact that, you know, yes, your challenges are different, those who are not working with you on a day-to-day basis. Probably Shane, your family is larger than Nick's, and Bruce, you've probably got some examples of boards you sit on or families you interact with. So meeting their expectations would probably be a challenge, or even it's a challenge at any time. But at this point in time, getting them to understand the challenges that you're facing, how do you get around that?
I would sort of look at a couple of areas. I think leadership is so important, so that's management, and where family are involved in management, it's got to be strong leadership by example. And I think you've got to be very careful you don't leave people behind. Quite often you see with strategies, the board will tend to want to impose strategy on management and forget the people down the bottom. I've found some of the best ideas that I've seen in practice have come from people lower down who observe. They notice behaviour, they notice systems, they have ideas about how they can improve systems. And I think the communication right through the organisation is important. Family members always work under a greater amount of scrutiny than anyone else in the business, and it's absolutely vital that they have a consistent message and that they do their jobs properly. And don't forget the board. For those family companies that are strong enough, they should have a board and they should have independent directors, and they shouldn't sit in a bubble. This leadership transcends the whole organisation, and I think you've got to have a lot of strong messages that cause people to have faith that we are going somewhere, that it's not the end of the road,
Right.
and that to listen to people and to make sure that their views are respected, and make sure that management are taking, the alignment between the board and management is very important, and to make sure that we are absolutely aligned in these times is a very strong message.
So family members, Shane, your family members who aren't working in the business, how do they support you, or you communicate with them during these times? Is it any different?
Well, it is. We've followed everyone else and moved on to Zoom meetings. So that's actually a good initiative, I think, and it means that they can hear first up how things are progressing and what's on. They can ask questions, and yet it's a relatively inexpensive exercise. So that was earlier this week, so first one. So that's working well. We also had quite a few of the non-working family back involved in the business, helping out, doing stuff when we were closed, particularly, and that's pretty good. Because that engagement coming back in has been pretty helpful for everyone, both families working in the business, but also just general management. Have other family come back and help and do the right thing is good.
So it is an opportunity for them to sort of re-engage and bring that family back into the value set, or what is distinctive about particularly your family. Your situation, Nick, is a little bit different, but with crisis with families, we all have them, and there's no one would say that this is easy running a family enterprise. But when you're running into these conflicts, does that prepare you for this bigger situation that you're coming through? Some of the times when you do bat heads, now this is something that's out of your control. Has that prepared you in some way for dealing with this uncertainty, this ambiguity?
Yeah, Justin, I think I think probably two parts to that for me is one is that I think as human beings, we don't do our best work in uncertain times or in uncertainty. And so realising that for the people in our business, and then controlling what we can control, and so bringing that feeling of, there's solid ground under our feet each day is important. So for the operational team, removing as much uncertainty as we're able to, right? But I think one of the great advantages of family firms, and Bruce touched on it, really is that the long-term orientation, but also the tolerance for ambiguity, right? And so there's my experience has been that there's some resilience that gets built up over time, but also there's an element of, the all-important element of trust that exists between family members and a functional family business, and that's a real asset. And I think, that really kind of the cream rises to the top, in a time like this where, again, the best family businesses come together and stick together to get through it.
Mm-hmm. So there's that sense of unity that this whole, that we're in this together, rather than the people who work in the business, that's their problem. Well, it's actually suddenly it's our problem, and to face it like that. You touched on the topic of governance, Bruce. And I know Shane mentioned to me many years ago, governance is like insurance. And to have that insurance during these times, to have wise counsel around you, whether it's a formal board with external directors or some sort of advisory board. What do you guys use as your forums or your place to go to get input, to share the leadership, apart from formal governance? Are there other ways that you actually buy into to get that support when you're, leading in adverse times?
We have a board who has a couple of independents on it, and we rely on them heavily. I actually have another group which is separate non-tourism businesses that we meet every couple of months, and we continue to meet again via Zoom over the recent months, and that's not bad because it's an idea that's often comes from that group is completely separate because they have no understanding of what our business is really about and how it's run, and so it's sort of like a separate little view on things, strategically as well as in a governance sense. So for me, that's probably where I get my two from, as well as industry itself. Industry is a pretty wide industry, and the one I'm in, it has a lot of facets to it. And hanging out with different people all the time gives you insights in the way other people handle things that you thought you were doing right, and you find out, no, there's another way of doing it.
Sure. So there's a formal through your board, through that structure that you've got in place there, but you've got a lot of informal ways to get information or get insight, I suppose, is what you're saying, and you value that because there could be someone who looks at it objectively. Okay, why don't you do it like this? Which is someone who's not close to your business. You, Nick, I know you hang out with a lot of entrepreneurs, and how valuable is that informal relationships that you have with them?
Yeah, I think that I think of that as a key part of my success structure, if you like, and so I'm a member of the Entrepreneurs Organisation. I mean, we have 14,000 members worldwide, and as part of that, we have a forum group. And so I'm in a group that meets each month. Yep. Confidentially. We're able to discuss challenges, opportunities, and so I can share ideas, challenges with that group. While it's not a formal board, they're like brothers and sisters for me, and they've been invaluable for me over the last 10 years in making better business decisions. And I think then more broadly outside of that, I'm a big believer in mentors, and Ken Moores, who's former Vice Chancellor of Bond, Ken's a mentor of mine, and I draw on his experience, his remembered knowledge, through crisis to help me. And actually, when I got off the plane, we just beat the COVID shutdown, returning from Bali, and the next day I rang Ken and said, the world's going mad, and just we had a half an hour chat about what my thoughts were, how I was going to navigate this period. And he actually asked me a really what turned out to be a very powerful question, which is, he said, so what's the story you want to tell when you're through this and you look back on it? How do you want to be remembered as a leader? as a business person in your family, and that was really got me thinking about, how did I want to stand up through this period?
Sure. Sort of gets to that concept of storytelling, doesn't it? To say, okay, here, what is the story or the ongoing story that you'll tell your kids, your kids, to say, okay, here, you lived through this. What is the stuff that you're learning right now? And it's probably a good time while you're in the middle of this. So, if you don't learn from it, you can't grow from it. So, what are some of the things that you would say that you're learning now that you didn't expect?
Can I just raise something on that previous topic? The real danger in times like this is looking inwardly and thinking, poor me, where, this is tough. But the idea of mentors, but equally, quite often find that boards are stuck on a bit of a pedestal and everyone's running around 2 days before a board meeting getting all this stuff right for the board. In these times, you've got to have, and I'm not a great believer of directors just going to whoever they want for the sake of getting certain information. They should be going through certainly the CEO, but they've got to have a presence, and it's not a presence once a month. You've got to change what you do so you're relating to the people in the organisation, because the whole underpinning mechanism of a family business is trust and respect, and that's got to be very, so that's all about being reliable, being competent, and you've got to talk to people in various ways, but certainly you've got to keep looking outwardly. You've got to find out what other organisations are doing. You've got to, don't read the paper too much, I think, because there's too much negative news, but get your basics right, understand your business, and work cooperatively with your organisation, including your board, to handle the problems. And don't be a crisis manager. Try to be in front of, managing your cash flow, looking after your biggest clients, customers, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a great point, Bruce. My experience has been he who harnesses the most brains wins.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what you're saying there is pretty consistent, I guess, that it's okay here, you need these externals, you need your informal as well as your formal brains trust or whatever you may like. Interesting you talk about also this, okay, here, not the poor me, not the poor me. And that must be hard because, living in your shoes, with, one day, could it get any worse? Well, yes, it seems to be that we're going from one disaster to another. What are the things that, if you reflect on, that are different about this crisis, or that you're really learning about not only your business, your family, and also yourselves?
I'd say, from my experience, that you've actually got to do something. You can't, there are times when you say to an organisation, your cost structures are all wrong, or your margins aren't right. And quite often there's a defensive mechanism which says, but we can't do this and we can't do that. My analogy is, look, if you really continue down this path and you run out of making profit and your cash flow is affected, they'll put a receiver in and the receiver sacks everyone and starts re-employing only those they need in the business. Now, if you've got to create a shock to do that in good times, certainly in tough times, you've got to start saying, are these structures right? Is there anything we can do differently? And I think containing unnecessary waste is so important, and just trying various things until you start to see improvements, and very much so your cash flow will be a determinant of those sorts of things. So you've got to keep, doing things that you haven't done before, but make sure that you maintain the confidence within the organisation and you don't say poor me or poor us. You're looking for things that will make a difference to your operating performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So differences about this time, what are the things that you're learning? If there was something there to say, gosh, I'll look back on this time and that was something I didn't expect.
I think, Justin, one of the things that's come out from COVID is that we've had no control over often what we can deliver as a business, and the customers, whoever they are, have had no control on what they want to accept. They've just had to accept whatever the chief health officer or premier of the day or whoever else has decided. And that's been an interesting experience because it's allowed, I believe, business to maybe step away a little bit from offering all things to all people and narrowing your delivery and say, well, actually I can only offer this. This is actually quite profitable, but this is it. And all these people are going, oh, we don't have much choice, we'll take it. And that's actually been good, but I do wonder how much that's going to actually change the philosophies of business going forward, where Bruce said there are a lot of businesses, and probably ours included, pretty fat with costs, but now have been slimmed down a fair bit by ensuring what it offers is not everything, it's offering what works and what's profitable, and the customers are okay with that. Now, does that mean longer term they'll still be okay with it? I'm not sure, but they are okay at the moment, and it's making the old making hay while the sun shines. That's probably where we are at the moment. How long it'll last, I don't know, but it's quite interesting. I think it's a bit of a fundamental shift. The customer's always right? Maybe not anymore.
So are you saying that it's got back to a pretty basic way of doing business?
Well, no, it's not basic way. It's probably more complicated in a lot of ways, but we've at least narrowed our offering and focused on what works absolutely and works within the confines of what we can do. And is that acceptable? You would think maybe not. Well, it seems to be acceptable. So that's a good outcome if it keeps on going, and we'll be working our way through to hopefully massage it a bit further so that it can do that. It can be profitable, can be ongoing, rather than going back to trying to offer so much choice and so much options for so many different markets that maybe you're just increasing your costs.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Shane says there, one of the things family business is known for is their agility, and we're in a market now which really is changing all the time, and with that sort of strategy, you're going to be here for the next uptick, and you're going to be agile enough to be able to move to that. And I think it's that flexibility that family businesses have always been able to show that are an enormous strength for them. But if you don't make the cuts and you don't focus and target what's going to keep you profitable during these hard times, you may not be there for the good times, and that is it is really so important to be here when the good times come. And they were, some of your problems, Shane, too, relate to governments closing borders. Governments, those factors are just out of your control, but they're going to change all that because the economy needs it, and it'll be the difficulties that the governments face that will make them a greater asset later, we hope, because there's absolutely no doubt there were great opportunities in these times, but we treated everyone the same and said we've got to close everything down because we've got this problem. We've had 2 cases this week, this sort of thing, and to me, I like the sense in what Shane has done to, basically produce, occupancy rates, etc., because of being sharp and knowing their market.
So there's a bit of unlearning to do, Shane. You've learned over 20 or 30 years to do it this way, and then suddenly you say, well, I've got to think differently,
Oh, well, yes, I think so. And you've got to be creative. I think it's the time to be very creative. And our vineyard didn't close, actually, during COVID, apart from a very initial stuff. We moved to everything being takeaway. And while that was challenging for a number of reasons, we actually even used neighbouring properties so that we could put more people on, and it worked from a licence perspective. And that was a very creative move, but it meant that we could keep trading and actually increase our profits rather than decrease or stop.
Survival. Let's talk about relationships. The key stakeholders that you have in business. And who are they. How has that changed over time? You focus on your key people, your staff, and so forth, your suppliers, and your financiers, and these guys. How have you been able to manage that? Because they're in the same situation. They don't have too much control over what can do. What are some of the things that you've done differently, or you've reinforced that you were doing from before, Nick?
Yeah, I think there's nothing quite like a crisis to create an opportunity for a bit of creative thinking as well. And I think, we work in the aviation space, and so. Of course, with the shutdown of flights and so forth, one of our key customers is Brisbane Airport, and right before the opening of the new parallel runway, of course, they got hit awfully hard and still are being hit today. And so we got together, back to that earlier point about what's the story we want to be able to tell, when this is over. And so, we contacted, knowing that they were hurting, we contacted them and said, look, we'll continue to support you, and look, we'll suspend our fees until you're through this. And now we had in the background, we've then got to we've got to put things in place to make sure that we're able to stay solvent and we can get through this period. But we made that decision because for us, it was a way of being able to demonstrate to them unequivocally that we're shoulder to shoulder with them, and that long term, will that trust get repaid? We think it will, but. In a family enterprise, we're able to make decisions like that, and one of our values is do the right thing in every situation, so for us that was do the right thing. And so, I think, to Bruce's earlier point, there's, no good kicking the dust on the ground and, crying in our soup. It's about controlling what we can control, make the decisions, pivot, react, and keep our eyes up, because we will get through this. We will.
So relationships, Shane, with your key stakeholders or key people?
I think the main relationship really for us has been with our market stakeholders to a certain degree, but really it's the market, our customers that we've kept in contact with and that have supported us once we've reopened again. And you've had to do that by a number of ways of communicating with them, obviously, but also for those that really wanted money back, giving it back to them, because some people just really needed money. And working with, I said, markets that have had to cancel Australia-wide conferences, for instance, and even within cancellation guidelines, it's still not right to be holding on to deposits and things, even if, because it's not their choice. So we've tried to keep our relationships pretty strong with all those different corporate leisure groups and individual leisure visitors, and international. A lot of international cancellations, which have been in some cases where they're not due deposits, well, we've gone through and where it's the right thing and we can pay and they can't come back, then we've been paying it out, and we've felt that that's given us a fair bit of goodwill from those people.
So would I be right in saying, just talking about deposits, because I hear a lot of people struggle with the bigger companies, getting deposits out, of trying to actually here because it's an argument and they're trying to defer. But in a family-owned company, you say, okay, here, well, this is the right thing to do. The decision is made because you want to be round at the end, you want to keep your reputation intact. It seems to be, well, that doesn't even come into it. What's the right thing to do? We can make that decision. Although you're absorbing the misery, that would be the consequence of that.
Can I add, actually, a good point there. I was remiss by not mentioning there is obviously one other very key relationship which we had and we have been very fortunate with, and that's with our bank. If you don't have that, then there's a challenge. Obviously, we put a plan together at the beginning. The bank can say, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to do it, this is money involved, and to our surprise, actually, they agreed to it and went with it, and we've followed it, and we've obviously done a lot better than we thought. But they've been very supportive, and I suppose that's the other key relationship. I think that's probably highlighted going forward, that we probably had a good relationship, but that is, we thought it was important, but now we really know it's important, because when we were on our knees, they supported us.
Mm. Bruce, that's probably something you've seen many times over the years. If you talk about relationships and communication with your financier, you want to make the call rather than them make the call to you. Would that be right?
Yeah, I'm going to say one other thing with my accountant's hat on. I think you've got to understand your balance sheet. A lot of people...
What does that actually mean, Bruce?
Well, the balance sheet actually tells a story. It talks about liquidity. It talks about, are you collecting your debtors within normal credit terms? What are your relationships with your major suppliers? So are your creditors out of whack? Shane talked about his bank. I mean, the worst thing that people do, even in good times, is not talk to the banker. Now, fortunately, during this crisis, there have been, the banks have been very good to most people. But once again, you've got to understand your balance sheet, explain to the bankers why certain things are happening. I saw a really bad case in the last month where a major supplier said, we're putting you on COD, which was tantamount to say, we're going to shoot you slowly. But he was fortunately able to go to the bank and get the funding he required, the working capital he required to see him through the tight times. But if you're poor at communication externally, then you'll get adverse reactions because people don't understand what's going on. And it doesn't matter what type of business, not all businesses are affected in the same way. Generally, smaller businesses, are funded differently. A lot of family businesses don't take big dividends, they reinvest in the business and neglect to have facilities that they may need for the rainy day. So I think if I talk to people and you start putting a balance sheet in front of a lot of people in family businesses, they tend to think someone else looks after that, but that's not good enough. You've got to actually understand that what you're doing in a day-to-day business impacts that balance sheet, and what I'd be saying is you don't want to see on your balance sheet all your funding being current, so that the bank can call it up tomorrow or next week and you've got nowhere to go. So if someone who wants to do business with you sees most of your debt being short term, they're going to say, well, how come? Mm-hmm. So this crisis may kill you. So you've got to be able to understand what it all means and take the appropriate action to be here for the longer term.
So that brings me to the question as I hear Shane say that, and I know Nick and I have spoken about this, the comfort you have, or the ability that you have to proceed and get through this, is dependent on these relationships that you have with these key stakeholders. From what I'm hearing now is that you are looking, when we come out of this, your close relationship with the financiers, to say, okay, I can sleep better at night because they're supporting me. The concept of that we like to talk about in this space is answering this simple question: are we in good hands? The bank is asking that question of you guys as operators. The family members are asking that question of you guys as the operators. Of the board, they're asking that same question. Are we in good hands? The work that you put in prior to this in governance, in strategy, in communication, really pays off during these times, I would suggest, even though they're unprecedented times. Would that be a correct observation? That you do spend a lot of time on your business prior to these times, so you are have that ability to be resilient or agile or whatever that work is. Can you just wrap up by talking about those things?
I'd talk about the role of boards is the focus has really shifted towards your risk profile, and you've got to be very comfortable with your risk profile, which will take into account seasonal conditions, capital investment decisions, etc., etc. And I think you've really got to be aware of the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that? You've got to have as much knowledge about your suppliers and customers as they have about you, because the worst thing is to have all your eggs in one basket and have too much of your turnover associated with one client, etc., or customer. And I think it comes back to my earlier point, is really understand your business, understand your cost structures, understand your customers, and make sure that all the big relationships are stable, and that people that you deal with have the confidence in you to weather these difficult times, because they don't last forever. And having the shorter term focus and getting the basics right enable you to come out 12, 18 months time in good shape. But once again, your probably first call is going to be to the bank, because we're about to go and we're going to need a fair bit more working capital. But these are dynamic relationships, not when I think about it, I'll go and talk to the bank. They've got to be part of your business.
All right, so I think to wrap up our session, there's some small to medium family enterprises probably watching this video. So what tips or advice could you give them through these challenging times? Nick?
Yeah, Lisa, I'm a simple guy, as I mentioned earlier. I think fundamentals of business for me, I think people, strategy, execution, cash. So I think first who, right? The people in the business are the most important. The people we've got on our bus. We can't always predict where we're going to drive it, but we can predict who's going to be on the bus. So first who, strategy, have our strategy clear. Simple. If we can't fit it on the back of a beer coaster, we probably don't have it right. I think execution, disciplined and consistent execution, and then cash. Have more oxygen canisters than we think we'll need. And I think being productively paranoid about what might happen, and knowing that the time to go get money is probably when we don't need it.
I think one of our hardest times has been when Australia was apparently booming, and we're above the dollar US, and all of our market went off overseas. Our overseas market decided not to come to Australia because it cost too much. So that was a tough time, and since then, being a remote area business with access issues with cyclones that took 2 years to resolve. We've had bushfires last year, which saw the first ever evacuation of our place, which was possibly uncalled for, but it's what happened. So then we come to COVID. It actually, in comparison, is pretty good. And that sounds very strange, but it actually is better. The business is better now than it has been. So I think the lesson to take out is that you just can't tell when's going to be good, when's going to be bad, and you're going to be possibly different to others. And you just got to be prepared, as Nick was saying, particularly having some reserves, so that when it is bad, you can get through it, and you hold on and focus on keeping that business focused on this market, and hopefully at some stage then it'll become good. And I suppose that's what we're finding at the moment. We're good at the moment. How long that'll last, I don't know, but we will continue to focus on our market and continue hopefully to be good until some other point, and we'll just have to work our way through it when we get there. But business changes, and it's very challenging in today's fairly unprecedented times to be able to really strategise on what you're going to do in the next 6-12 months, I think.
Yeah, it's great advice. Impressive.
I'm going to go for strong leadership
Yep.
because we don't want any panic in these times. There are good stories within a business. Shane talked about the focus on areas that have become profitable, and that has been better than expected in his time. My view is leadership from the top, including the board, and also don't forget the people down the line, because they are absolutely fundamental to the success of your business, and it's time to make everyone important, and it's also very important that you delegate properly, but make sure when you delegate that the people understand what you're delegating, and report back so that we are aligned from top to bottom.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your insights, and thank you at home for watching the Business Now video series. We'll see you next time.